Hi, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on social media research made actionable. My name is Saurabh, and my colleague Mario and I will be taking you through understanding your chocolate, your fans, and your strategy. This will be new to some of you and will be old news for others. It is really true that social media is everywhere right now. 90% of people trust recommendations versus only 14% trusting traditional marketing advertising. 77% of people use information from blogs to make decisions, and so many links are user generated. Social media truly is everywhere, and as such, we believe that the unbiased social media context is a valuable source of information, which will influence your brand marketing decisions. With this as a starting point, I'll now hand over to Mario for background.
Thank you so much, Surab, for the introduction. I'm going to speak a little bit of the background of the study and what brought us here. So here at Scheme, of course, we are aware that social media can be a very important source of information and that there's a lot of data in social media, that there are a lot of people speaking about brands online, and we wanted to know if we could use that data as a source of insights. So basically what we did, we came up with a case study. We used publicly available data. I'm going to go through the design setup of it so you can understand what we did better. So in this slide, you can see that social media research is a step forward from the classic research that marketing research companies like ourselves do. But it's also a step forward from social media monitoring that most of the brands here already do. So this is something that companies do if they want to track on a day-to-day basis what's the sentiment, for example, of the mentions online towards their brand. Basically, for social media research, we used the same kind of software to capture these entries in social media, but the idea was to extract some insights from it. So instead of having a tactical day-by-day risk management approach to it, we wanted a more strategic approach to it. So what we did was we decided to look at what was being mentioned online about chocolate bars in two countries in two different languages. In this slide you can see that it was in the United States and in Brazil, of course in English and in Portuguese. The chocolates are the ones there, and they were the most representative in the market, in both markets. Three of these chocolate bars are present in both countries. So this is Kit Kat, Hershey's, and Twix. And we're going to focus this presentation mostly on Hershey's. It's very talked about in both countries. The data was collected or is referenced to a year, even though, of course, the data collection by us didn't took a year, but the software allows us to go back a year in time. So the data is referenced to a whole year of conversational lines regarding these brands. So what exactly do you want to accomplish with this study? So the idea is to use social media conversations about these chocolate brands and to generate some insights. So the idea is to understand who these consumers are and look at them. Try to understand the perceptions that they have of these brands and how they express them online. What triggers them to speak about these brands, and what kind of communication campaigns, ideas could be extracted from here, for example. On the next one, I'm going to take you through the design of the study and how such a project typically goes. So first of all, you have to come up with the specification of keywords that you're looking for. Of course, as we already showed, all those big numbers in the beginning of this process, there's a lot being spoken online and you need to know what you're looking for. So you need to, in this case, we specify these keywords for these chocolate bars. And then there's a fieldwork process. So this is instead of normal fieldwork like we usually do, which is asking people online or something. In this case, we just do internet scanning. So it's totally an unbiased approach. And then finally, an output and analysis. So just an example of how this looks like. This is an extract from what Surab tweeted this morning. So he's saying that it's rainy in New York morning and almost got hit by a cab, but thanks God for Snickers, yum, and love. So for example, this entry, the software will pick it up because Snickers is present there. And there's a lot of information present here. I mean, if you look at it, you know that he's speaking about it with some passion about the brand. You know that he's speaking something about yum, so something about taste. And there's also an emotion there, very present, so love. And you also can know that it's rainy, you know it's morning, you know it's New York. And you can also know a lot of things from the account that Surab has. So if he set up his Twitter account with some data in there, so it's saying he's a male, that he was born in some day that I also don't know, then the software can also tell us that. So what we did was combine all these entries. Here you can see another example, this one coming from Brazil. It's Gustavo, and he's saying that, he's asking, so do you want Kit Kat back in Brazil? And then he's saying, yes, I really want to. So you know it's about Kit Kat. You know there's a lot of passion in it. There's an anticipation for it. There's desire for the brand. You know it's positive. You know it's a male. You know it's age. And you know you mentioned it on Twitter. Uh, Once you combine all of these entries, you can come up with a lot of insights. That's what we're going to try to present. Just going to show how this presentation is going to flow. So we're going to start by your chocolate. So we're going to speak about the competitive landscape of these brands. How do consumers perceive the brand identity? And then we're going to take a look at the fans themselves. We're going to try to build a consumer persona. And we're going to talk about platform effectiveness. And finally, we're going to talk you to the strategy part. So what kind of actionable recommendations can be withdrawn from here? And now I'm going to pass it to Surab, and he's going to take you through the competitive landscape. Take it, Surab.
Remember that social media conversations happen freely online, and as such, it is very important to understand how your brand stands compared to your competitors in the competitive environment. In order to understand online conversations, we have developed a 2x2 matrix that plots sentiment by passion. Sentiment is the range of conversations going from less positive to more positive, whereas passion is the intensity of these conversations. For example, if you like something, that is moderately passionate, but if you absolutely love it, that is highly passionate. If your brand is talked about with high sentiment and high positivity and high passion, you're in a good spot. You're in the golden quadrant with the star in it, and you can sustain this brand equity. If your brand is talked about with less passion but still high sentiment, you need to revitalize your brand in order to build that passion amongst the consumers who talk about it online. If, however, the sentiment is also low, as is the passion, it's not too bad a place to be because at least the passion is low, and what is needed is to reposition your brand with communications, line extensions, and such. However, the tough spot to be in is if the passion is high and the sentiment is low, because what this means is not only do online consumers dislike your brand, they actually hate it. In this case, the only option is to rebrand. So, where do our 6 brands that Mario talked about earlier fall into these 4 quadrants? Here we see that in the Brazilian market as well as the US, the brands fall into different quadrants. The Golden Quadrant in the US is filled by brands that are less talked about because the size of the bubble represents the volume of online conversations. This Golden Quadrant provides an opportunity area in Brazil. It's also interesting to note that similar brands across the 2 countries are perceived slightly similarly in some respects. For instance, Hershey's is less passionately talked about in both countries. However, it's more positive in the US and less positive in Brazil. Twix has the opposite relationship. And in this way, we can really understand how our brands are perceived and talked about online with respect to our competitors. Another way in which you can understand your brand's competitive environment is by understanding how sentiment varies over time. Social media monitoring plots this, and we have tried to do something similar by plotting the percentage of conversations that are positive across the 1 year that we examined these brands. What this shows is a few peaks of positivity and a few troughs, in which case the conversations were probably more negative. It is interesting to see trends across the brands. For example, Hershey's does pretty well during Halloween and Valentine's, showing that it does well in these seasons. Kit Kat did extremely well in February when it launched a Have a Break commercial that people seem to have liked a lot. However, they did not like the chunky product that was launched in March, and so the sentiment immediately plummeted. This is a very current and honest view of how your daily brand actions can affect your brand, and is thus extremely powerful and useful to understand the competitive context. Another way to understand your brand is to see how it is talked about online. Chocolate can be talked about as a snack, a candy, or a dairy bar. It is only Hershey's that is talked about as all three almost equally. Otherwise, Toblerone is talked primarily as a snack bar, and Snickers, Kit Kat, and Twix are talked about as candy bars. This is interesting because it puts these three bars as prime competitors. And what is more interesting here is Snickers. Is it really then a snack? Because as you can see here, Snickers has been trying to market itself as a satisfying snack, with advertising reading like take classes at university or slay dragons with Sir Snacks a lot. Or this Facebook user who said, I've eaten Snickers before track practice. It's really trying to come across as a brand that relays energy and is a satisfying snack. However, we saw that there is a disparity online because it's perceived as a candy bar. And the reason for that is articles like this one, which show that it is a benchmark for high sugar. Indeed, when people say things like both Snickers and toast with butter like 5 inches are mostly sugar and fat, neither is healthy, we do understand that people online are perceiving this as a candy bar. So this is a very good example of a lesson to be learned, which is that while you may try to market yourself as one thing, you may be perceived as something else. So the lesson to learn is not only do you need to exercise good brand management, which includes line extensions and the likes, not only do you need to exercise good marketing management, couponing, retailing, and such, but you also need to listen to your consumers. Marketing and research do this really well. There are many ways to listen to your consumers, and social media is now the very current, very quick, very easy, and very happening way to listen to your consumers. And that's why you're probably all here trying to learn about social media. With that, I'll pass back to Mario, who will enable you to understand how you can perceive your brand identity and use it to leverage your brand strength.
Thank you so much, Surab. So now we're going to talk about perceived brand identity and why this is important. Well, we believe that if you understand the perceived brand identity online, you can lose it. You can use it to leverage your brand strengths. This is if you're trying to create communication materials or if you're trying to engage with your clients. You need to understand what are your brand strengths and how do they position the brand in relation to others. So we're going to go back to the beginning to a slide Surab talked about so we can frame it better. So for example, Hershey's is in that quadrant where it could be increased the passion. So the people are speaking about it positively, but the passion could be increased. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to understand what is the perceived brand identity for Hershey's and what kind of things can they leverage to revitalize the brand, basically. So the way we frame this is based on a matrix for conscious and subconscious consumer perceptions. It's divided in three parts. Emotional benefits, so that's the way a brand makes you feel. personality elements. So that is a human characteristic used to describe the brand. So that's how people identify with the brands. And finally, the functional benefits. So this is the desired efficacy of a product. So for example, what do you want from a chocolate bar? So this is the first one. Don't get scared by all these colors. I'm just going to explain a little bit how this is organized. On the left, you can see all these categories starting with taste and ending in scent. These categories are organized by importance. So in this chocolate bar market online, these are the most important functional benefits. So taste is the one that is mentioned the most. So it's the functional benefits people are speaking about when they're speaking about these chocolate bars. On your right, you can see all these brands on the top. They are organized by increasing volume of buzz, in a way that Hershey's is the most talked about and Toblerone the least. This is data from the US, of course. And all these colors means that we came up with a way to organize it. Um, so basically, if it's green, means the brand has a strength. If it's red, means there's a weakness. And if it's gray, means it's neutral, or black, no mentions. Now we're going to focus on Hershey's. That's why you can see the colors more vividly. And Hershey's, for example, for the two most important categories for the chocolate bars, has a weakness. So people are not speaking a lot about Hershey's in relationship with taste or with new, which means novelty. So this kind of mentions, this kind of context is not very much used to speak about Hershey's. It's also important to see that their strengths is that it's not too sweet. So this is the only brand who's mentioned like this. So it's very different from the rest. And there's also mentions to price, uh, to feeling good, to different, and to scent. To scent is actually the only brand that is spoken about this. So the smell. So this can also be very important. Now we're going to look at the emotional benefits. So again, it's organized the same way as it was the one before. Here the most important categories are appreciation, so this is a lot of thank you messages, and happiness. So this is when people are conveying happiness, the feeling, the emotion of being happy, together with an entry about a brand and close to the name of the brand. So what we can see here, again, the green are the strengths and the red are the weaknesses. Again, we can see that Hershey's is very strong on the most important one, so appreciation. We actually see a lot of data coming with thank you messages regarding Hershey's. On the other hand, happiness, which is also a very important emotional benefit in this kind of market, there's a weakness for Hershey's in there. And if you know Hershey's in any way, you will know that they position themselves slightly different from the rest of the brands like this. It's more of a sober brand. Their packaging is brown. And so the happiness is not such a surprise that it doesn't come as a strength for Hershey's. On the other hand, anticipation scores very good. People also trust the brand. It's a brand that gives them trust. And there's also a lot of pride in it. Which brings us to our last part of our matrix, which is the personality elements. So this is where people can identify on a personal level with brands. Again, the same organization. In this one, you see that the most important characteristic in the American market is being funny. Funny is the one that has most mentions in the social media data that we collected for this year. What you can see there is that Hershey's scores a weakness here. So it doesn't score as well as the other brands, which is not such a surprise. Like I said, this is more like a sober brand. So they don't do commercials that are funny. But this is important to see that because it is the most important aspect, personality element in this whole chocolate bar category. So it's very interesting for Hershey's to see that on the top three ones, funny, generosity, and kindness, they don't score very well. There's also the opportunity to, because if they would score well in any of these two, three, you can see that Snickers also is not strong in any of these three. So there's definitely a space of opportunity here for Hershey's. On the other hand, on the strengths that Hershey's already has, you can see that there's conscientiousness, It's associated with Hershey's. That's also a fashionable brand. There's a lot of creativity about it. It's sexy and it's mysterious. So all of this combines to a more sober profile of this brand. This is more what describes the perceived brand identity of Hershey's in the American market. Next, we're going to look at a comparison between the American market and the Brazilian market. Here you can see a very important difference. These are again personality elements, and they are organized as we already saw. So the one on the left is for the US, and you already saw it. The one on the right is for Brazil, and it's new. And the only thing that I want to point out is that funny, although it's very important as a personality element in the US, it's not very important in Brazil. It comes lower here. However, Hershey's in Brazil has a strength in funny. So people perceived it as being funny, which is very interesting because in Brazil it's not very important. Uh, so if we put all of this together, all of this perceived brand identity comes forward is this one. So for Hershey's, appreciation symbolizes gratefulness. So you can see some examples of it there. So, oh, that stack of Hershey's bars is calling my name. Thank you, Hershey's. Thanks to Hershey's, I'm feeling better. Thanks for the motivation, Hershey's, a Twitter user in December 2010. But on the other hand, the lack of humor and the poor taste perceptions lower the happiness. So for example, the last time I recall hitting a Hershey's bar, it tasted dreadful. For example, somebody said on Google Plus in July 2012. Or even worse, Hershey's chocolate is gross, milk chocolate bars are greedy, and they taste weird. So now I'm going to pass it to Surab, who's going to take us through your fans part of this presentation.
Now that we have understood our chocolate and our brand, competitive landscape, and brand identity, it is important to understand who these people are that are talking about us online. These are our fans. Just a note about this before we get into it is that social media is publicly available data. And as such, the demographics have to be publicly available, as does IP tracking geographic data, which tells us where these conversations are coming from. These are sometimes not revealed, in which case the allusion to demographics in verbatims is used to find out a little bit more. For instance, if somebody says, I'm celebrating my 18th birthday in Times Square, you know how old they are and you know where they are. As such, while demographics can be perceived as being a little more directional with social media research than with other forms, it is still extremely valuable, as we will now see. This is a breakdown of gender and age across the 6 brands we looked at, and very quickly we can see that Hershey's has a large proportion of females, and Snickers has the largest proportion of males. Hershey's also has the smallest youth segment, with Twix having the largest one. In terms of where these brands are highly talked about, Hershey's conversations are driven mainly by blogs, whereas Snickers is driven mainly by Facebook. This is really important because these brands can now understand what platforms they can leverage to get their message across, because these are the platforms in which their fans are talking about them the most. What this has allowed us to do is create brand personas for these 2 brands. For instance, young and middle-aged women talk about Hershey's. They talk mostly on blogs in the US and often on Twitter in Brazil. They purchase it in grocery or mass retail stores. It is mainly eaten by their men or their children. Their children eat it in school, and they eat it at home on holidays and other occasions. This alone is extremely powerful and understand who the key fan, who the key consumer of Hershey's is, and what the Hershey's bar does from the time that they buy it or even think about it till the time that it is consumed, and when. We can do the same for Snickers, as we can see here. Guys between 18 to 35 talk about Snickers. They talk mostly on Facebook, and they purchase it at fast food joints or vending machines. It is for them or their friends, and they eat it during work. This, again, is very important in understanding who Snickers' core consumer is. And finally, we come to the part about your strategy, how to develop actionable recommendations, which by now we hope have demonstrated are very possible to create for your brand. Note that at the onset, our goals were to try to find out who our consumers are, what their perceptions are, any triggers for communication campaigns, and the likes. We have noted these for Hershey's. For example, we know their consumers, we know the perceptions based on the brand identity and how they're perceived. We know the triggers are seasonal, and we know that communication campaigns may be successful on two key platforms as well as grocery stores and the likes. As such, we can now come up with a recommendation for Hershey's, which is based on the triggers. This is that Hershey's should be a more sleek, stylish, and conscientious chocolate bar, which guarantees your true appreciation and drives anticipation, especially around holiday seasons. None of this is new, this is all coming entirely from social media data, and we believe that this is truly actionable and truly doable. As you recall from the 2x2 matrix, Hershey's needed to revitalize its brand for building a little more passion, and this is primarily in the US. In order to do so, we recommend a few areas of development for Hershey's in order to revitalize. This is to develop indulgent and taste-driven messaging and introduce humor to evoke happiness. We noticed that these elements were lagging based on the brand identity. In the long run, we suggest that Hershey's develops tasty, seasonal flavors given the success in promotions over holidays. Once again, nothing here should be new by now. It's all coming from the different pieces that we have covered already. And as such, we hope to have demonstrated that social media research is truly actionable. With that, I will hand back to Mario to conclude.
Thank you, Surab. So what can we conclude from this study? Well, first of all, we can conclude that there's a lot of information available online about people speaking about brands. And we believe that this is very important for brands to understand. If brands want to engage with customers, if brands want to generate effective communication materials, if brands want to target correctly the social space, then this comes up as a very important source of information. There's a lot being talked about brands, and it can be done in various languages, so in this case in English and in Portuguese. What we can say from this is that this brand perception analysis should allow you to align this online perception that people have of your brands with your marketing and brand management in a way that you can leverage the positive conversations and the positive perceptions and the context in which people are speaking about brands to have an effective effect on the market. So on the purchase intent, in recommendations, and driving brand identity up. Now, of course, we know there are several challenges regarding this technique. We are very excited about it. It seems a very exciting field. We would love to talk about it. Please come to us after this webinar. If you have some questions, we would love to talk about it. There's a lot of challenges associated with it, but I think there's definitely a lot of value in this kind of information. So just to wrap it all up, so social media is an honest and real-time view of brands, and we agree that it should be used, so we believe. Brands can use it as an ethnography, so standing by the side, just observing and analyzing how their brands are being spoken about online. You can use it as a concept generation, so more of an ideation concept, being inspired by this online data. You can also use it to measure campaign effectiveness and to try to improve campaign effectiveness. And this can be used as a standalone or as a complementary study. So you can use this to gain inspiration for other studies or inspiration to ask questions. Or you can use it as a standalone study. Ultimately, this is another way to understand those who matters most, your consumers, and another way to put them in the center of your brand. Thank you so much.